Ever get an invoice and think, wait a minute, did I even order this? Ooh, that little voice in your head, that could be your intuition saving you from a scam. So today, we are diving deep into fake invoice fraud. We'll figure out what it looks like, how it tricks people, and how to protect yourself, which is the most important part. We've got articles for this, real-life stories, even some confusing legal stuff. But by the end, you'll be a total fake invoice detective. You'll spot a scam a mile away.
You know, it's interesting. These scams, they really work because they play on our trust in invoices. We're so used to getting them that we don't always, look at them carefully.
Okay, that makes sense. It's kind of like when we just skim those terms and conditions online, we just assume everything's legit. So how do these scammers make their fake invoices look so real?
Oh, they get super creative. They might steal real company logos, make believable line items. They even include fake contact info that, at first glance, looks totally real.
I bet you've got some examples in our sources for this.
Oh, I do. One article, it talks about this case. This business got an invoice for office supplies, and it looked like it was from a well-known vendor. Had the logo, item numbers, of the whole 9 yards. But when they really looked into it, they realized the vendor didn't even exist.
Wow, they made up a whole company just for the scam. That's incredible. I bet these scams, they must fly under the radar all the time, especially in busy offices.
Yeah, unfortunately, it happens a lot, especially with B2B fraud, business to business. There's this one trick, the phantom vendor scam. The scammer doesn't just send one fake invoice, they actually create a whole fake company and try to get it on a real company's vendor list.
So they're basically setting up a long-term scam. That's devious. Our sources mention a bunch of different types of invoice fraud. What else should we be looking out for?
One that's pretty dangerous is business email compromise. BC for short. They don't create fake companies with this one. They actually hack into real email accounts, usually company execs or suppliers. Then they use these hacked accounts to send fake invoices, and those look totally authentic.
Oh, that's scary. If you think an email is from your boss or a vendor you trust, you wouldn't question it. No wonder BEC scams are getting more common.
Exactly. It's all about using that existing trust. And then there's the overpayment scam. It's kind of like a reverse robbery. The scammer sends an invoice that's way more than what you owe, and then they ask for a refund of the overpayment. So you end up sending them money.
So they kind of turn the tables on you. Yeah, I can see how someone could fall for that, especially if they're busy or not paying close attention. Are there any other variations?
Definitely. One that targets individuals more than businesses. It's the fake subscription scam. You get an invoice for, like, a software subscription or a streaming service that you never even signed up for. They use real-sounding company names, or they even, copy existing brands to make it seem real.
So if we think about everything we've talked about so far, these scammers, they're masters of disguise. They use our trust and invoices against us. They make really good fakes. And they know how to, take advantage of our busy lives. But don't worry, everyone. We're going to learn how to see through their tricks.
That's right. The good news is there are red flags. They can help you spot these scams before you lose money. Let's start with a really obvious one, unsolicited invoices. If you get an invoice for something you didn't order or from a company you've never even heard of, that's a huge warning sign.
I feel like that's an easy one to spot. You'd know if you didn't order something, right? But I guess sometimes it can be tricky. Like with subscriptions, maybe you signed up for a free trial and forgot about it.
That's a good point. We do sign up for things online without really thinking about it. And those free trials, they can turn into paid subscriptions if you don't cancel them. So yeah, even something that seems obvious, like an unsolicited invoice, it can still catch us off guard.
Okay, so what else should we be on the lookout for?
Let's talk about pressure tactics. Scammers, they love to create a sense of urgency. They'll say an invoice is overdue or threaten you with penalties if you don't pay right away. They're hoping you'll panic and just pay without thinking.
So they're basically trying to mess with our common sense, make us react emotionally instead of logically. I can see how that would work.
Absolutely, they play on fear and uncertainty. Another big red flag is unusual payment methods. If they want you to pay through wire transfer, cryptocurrency, or gift cards, that's a big problem.
Right, those are usually associated with scams because they're hard to trace. I remember reading about this case. This business almost lost thousands of dollars. They got an invoice, looked real, but it asked for payment in Bitcoin. Luckily, someone in their accounting department, they noticed the weird payment request and stopped it before any money was sent.
That's a perfect example. Paying attention to the details, it can really save you. And speaking of details, we need to talk about misspellings and errors. Fake invoices, they often have typos, incorrect company names, or just bad formatting. It might seem small, but it's a big sign that something's wrong.
I've definitely noticed that with phishing emails, there's often like a weird typo.
Yeah.
Or the formatting is just a little bit off. It's like they're trying to be convincing enough to not make you suspicious, but they mess up on the details.
Exactly. They're not always the smartest criminals. Another thing to watch out for is missing, or just really generic information. A real invoice, it should have specific details about what you're being charged for, like a breakdown of the charges, clear contact info. Fake invoices, they might be vague or missing those details.
Yeah, makes sense. They're trying to look convincing, but they don't want to give too much info that could be traced back to them. What other warning signs should we be aware of?
One last red flag is any changes in supplier payment information. If you get new bank account details or payment instructions out of the blue, without any warning or verification, that's a major red flag. Always double-check any changes directly with the supplier. Use contact info that you find yourself, not from that potentially fraudulent communication.
So it's all about double checking and not taking anything at face value. That reminds me of this one time I almost fell for a phishing scam.
Oh, what happened?
I got this email, looked exactly like it was from my bank. It asked me to update my login info. I was about to click the link. And then I noticed a tiny error in the website address. It was just one letter off, but that was enough for me to know something wasn't right. So I reported it to my bank, and they told me it was a phishing attempt.
Wow, that's a great example.
hmm
Being careful and paying attention to details, it can really save you. You were lucky to catch that small error.
I know, right? It was a close one. It made me realize how easy it is to fall for these scams if you're not being careful.
That's why we're doing this whole deep dive, to help you develop those fake invoice detective skills so you can protect yourself and your business. Now that we know the red flags, let's move on to the best ways to stop these scams from happening in the first place. One of the most effective things you can do is set up a really good payment verification process. Businesses should have a clear way to review invoices, make sure they're real, and that they match up with actual orders or contracts. Never pay an invoice without verifying it first.
Sounds simple enough. But I bet that extra check can make a big difference. In a busy business, it's easy for things to slip through the cracks.
Oh, absolutely. That's why employee training is so important. Make sure everyone who deals with invoices knows how to spot these scams.
Yeah.
And that they know the company's process for checking invoices like the back of their hand.
Yeah, it's not enough for just one person to know, right? Everyone needs to be on the same page. What kind of training would you suggest?
Well, it should cover all those types of fraud we talked about. B2B, BEC, overpayment scams, fake subscriptions, and it should definitely go over those red flags we talked about. Employees should be trained to really look at invoices, look for anything that doesn't add up, and double check anything that seems off.
So you're basically training them to be those fake invoice detectives we were talking about.
Exactly. And don't forget about real-life examples. Sharing stories about how other people have been tricked by these scams, that can be a really powerful way to learn.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hearing those real-world cases would definitely make it feel more real. Our sources mention accounting software as a way to catch these scams. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, for sure. A lot of accounting software programs, they can actually help you find duplicate invoices. Or they can flag weird payment patterns that could mean fraud. It's like having an extra set of eyes on your money.
So it's not a perfect solution, but it's a good part of your overall defense.
Exactly. And of course, you should always be checking your accounts for any payments you don't recognize. Setting up those transaction alerts can help you catch suspicious activity quickly. If you see a payment you don't remember making, contact your bank or credit card company right away.
So it's all about being proactive and staying on top of your finances.
You got it. And finally, if you do get a suspicious invoice, don't just ignore it. Report it. Contact your local authorities, the Federal Trade Commission, or any consumer protection groups. Businesses can also report it to the Better Business Bureau and any relevant industry groups.
So take action and spread the word. It's all about everyone being aware, right?
Exactly. The more we share what we know and work together, the better we can fight these scams.
Speaking of sharing information, there's this other type of scam in our sources. I found it really interesting. It's a little more complicated. It's all about those fraudulent directory solicitations.
Yeah, those can be tricky. They use legal disclaimers to make these solicitations look like real invoices. They often target businesses. They prey on, their need for visibility and getting their name out there.
That's right. They send you this thing that looks exactly like an invoice. It's got a due date, payment info, everything. But then hidden in the fine print, there's this tiny disclaimer. It says it's just a solicitation, not an actual bill.
Exactly. They're hoping you'll either mistake it for a real invoice and pay it without reading that fine print, or that you'll think it's just asking you to update your info in a real directory. But if you sign and send back the form, you might be accidentally agreeing to pay some hidden fee.
It's like they're playing a legal game, using technicalities and loopholes to trick people. I bet you've got some examples from our sources.
Oh, I do. One article, it talks about this common tactic where they send you a final notice of domain listing from a made-up company. They make it sound like your domain name won't be registered or listed in search engines unless you pay.
So they're using people's fear of losing their online presence.
Exactly. But really, all they're offering is to submit your domain to search engines, something you can easily do yourself for free.
Wow, it's crazy how they can take something so simple and make it sound so important and urgent. What other examples did you find?
Well, fake invoices for Yellow Pages listings, those are still surprisingly common. They might claim to have, like, thousands of readers, but those directories, they often have really limited distribution, if they even exist at all. They use vague language, like offering 50,000 copies, without saying if those copies were even printed or given out.
So they're just creating this image of being legit without actually giving any real value.
You got it. They also target businesses that just registered trademarks or made changes to their public records, because they know those businesses probably need directory listings.
It's kind of scary how much effort they put into researching their targets. Makes those detective skills you mentioned even more important. But these solicitations, they look so official. How can you tell if they're real or not?
You can use a lot of the same red flags we talked about for fake invoices. Look for typos, generic info, vague claims, and pressure tactics. And most importantly, always read the fine print really carefully.
Okay, so even if it looks like an invoice, don't assume it is. Always double check and verify before you pay anything.
Absolutely. And if you're not sure, call the company directly. But use contact info that you find yourself, not from the solicitation.
That's a good point. Don't trust the information they give you. Do your own research.
Exactly. And remember, real directories, they don't need to use these tricky tactics. They're upfront about their fees and what they offer.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've learned about different types of fake invoice scams, how to spot them, and how to protect ourselves. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about employee training. You mentioned how important employee training is, especially for businesses. What would good training actually look like?
Well, good training, it needs to cover everything. And it needs to be, interesting. Start by going over all those types of fake invoice fraud that we've talked about. B2B fraud, BEC scams, overpayment schemes, those fake subscriptions. And don't forget about those tricky directory solicitations.
Right, so it's like giving them all the knowledge they need so they know what to look out for. What else should be included in the training?
You definitely want to focus on those red flags. Employees need to be able to spot unsolicited invoices right away. They need to recognize pressure tactics and know how to identify unusual payment methods. And don't forget about those sneaky misspellings and missing information.
So it's like you're training them to see those little things that don't add up. It's almost like that game Spot the Difference. But obviously the stakes are a lot higher here.
That's a great way to put it. And just like with any game, practice makes perfect. So use real-life examples in the training.
Yeah.
You could even create simulations where employees have to look at invoices and figure out if they're scams.
That's a really good idea. It would make the training more interactive and fun. I bet people would remember the information better that way. Anything else you'd suggest?
It's really important to make sure employees feel comfortable taking action if they see something suspicious. Make sure the company has clear steps for verifying invoices, reporting anything that seems off, and escalating concerns to the right people.
So it's about giving them the tools they need and the confidence to do something if they think something's wrong. And this shouldn't just be a one-time thing, right?
Exactly. The ways these scammers work are always changing. So you need to keep doing training and make sure employees know about the latest scams. Just regular reminders and updates can make a big difference in keeping everyone on their toes.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like everyone needs to be constantly learning and staying up to date. This has been so helpful. I feel like I can spot these scams a lot better now. But before we go, what about people at home? Are there any tips you'd give them to stay safe?
Absolutely. A lot of the same things we've talked about apply to individuals too.
Ah.
Be careful about who you give your personal info to online. Look closely at any invoices or bills you get that you weren't expecting. And never feel like you have to pay something without checking it out first.
So it's about using that same careful thinking with our personal finances as we would with our businesses.
Exactly. And remember, if you do run into a scam, don't be afraid to report it. You could be helping someone else from getting tricked.
It's all about looking out for each other. If we share what we know and work together, we can make it much harder for these scammers to get away with it.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into the world of fake invoice fraud. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us.
It was my pleasure.
And to all of our listeners out there, remember, knowledge is power. Stay informed, be careful, and stay safe. If you have any questions or want to learn more about this topic, check out the links in the show notes. We'll see you next time.